Well, that's interesting because I almost built the program for one particular student of mine who happens to be the person who's also helping me. She's the other half of the team that spins the wheels at popMATICS. Her name is Angela
Hmm.
Senich. And so she started piano lessons with me in 2020. And she came to me as an advanced classical pianist. I would just say an advanced pianist, but
Hmm.
she or an advanced student. Let's call it that way. She's an advanced student with a background in classical music, but she was also in bands and she wanted to learn more about improvisation, but not necessarily from a jazz context.
Uh-huh.
And the program, when she was taking lessons, because she was starting with just individual private lessons, they were expensive and she couldn't take them every week. And so she would space them out and she would take them every other week and we would record. But she still wasn't really able to immerse herself the in the environment and in the learning. And
Hmm.
so when I thought about building a program like this, my goal was to make something for students like that who are extremely eager to learn and don't have infinite resources to take private lessons as often as they want, and
Yeah.
so that they could really immerse themselves in an environment where they could take lessons as often as they'd like for one fixed monthly payment. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So start off with like just one person. Is that right? Like
Well, yeah,
that
I,
was it?
I didn't really see. I was making a transition
Uh-huh.
from the model that I had. So I was working with private lessons, doing one-on-one private lessons with students, mostly I would say students that were teenagers, middle school students, and I had a few adult students. And part of it was I needed to escape that routine. It wasn't working for me
Mm.
anymore.
What do you
I
mean like
had
escape? What are you escaping?
Well, I had 50 private
Mm.
one-on-one lessons on the calendar every week, and I have a very accommodating personality. So if people wanted to reschedule, I would do my best to accommodate that. And it was just getting to the time of the year, the spring sports schedule, where I was getting a lot of requests for reschedules, and I couldn't manage it any longer.
Yeah.
And I realized that this type of schedule wasn't going to serve me for much longer. And so I came up with this model of what if I presented the classes, and rather than having it where you meet at a specific time, I give them the availability of when I'm going to be here in a class schedule and say, for
Hmm.
one price, you can come to as many of these classes as you want. So that is, I was in a way trying to escape this lifestyle of teaching one on one private lessons and feeling a little, I guess, overwhelmed by just
Yeah.
managing the schedule, the
Hmm.
administrative elements of running a business, and I just wanted to teach. And I didn't I didn't like having that kind of inconsistency, but I also didn't like having policies that were so tight that were not flexible for students either. So this was my
Hmm.
way of saying, this is my availability. Come when you'd like.
Interesting. Like the way that you flipped it around, like instead of having to chase students who needed to make up to now like being like, here's my schedule, come whenever you want to. Like, did you come up with the idea on your own or did that come from somewhere? Like like
Well,
how'd you like initially come up with that idea?
I think part of it, I say I came up with it very quickly in terms of making the decision to change. Like when I made the decision that I was going to change this business model from one-on-one private lessons to this form of group lessons,
Uh-huh.
I made the decision in like 30 days. That was what was in place, and I wasn't
Gotcha.
offering, and I was not going to offer private lessons anymore, and so
Mm.
I canceled private lessons for an entire month. And at first, I just told my students, I said, "You can try this new model, and if you don't like it, you can let me know and we can talk after that." Because that was the question everybody had. Can we still do
Mm.
private lessons? And I'm like, not for the month of June. We're not going to do any private lessons in the month of June. This is what I'm focused on. This is what I what I want to do. It was really poor timing on my part. It was not well thought
Gotcha.
out.
Did you have any like fears or concerns before you even like announced it out?
Yes. Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely. I feared losing every single one of my students.
mm,
And because I know that they love that one-on-one private lesson experience.
yeah.
And I knew that what I was offering was going to be a big change from that. So I knew there would be some discomfort, and a lot of people, once they get comfortable with something that they like, they don't want it to change.
Hmm.
So with a change of format, I feared that I was going to lose all of my students. And I remember having a conversation with my mentor, and he said, "Well, even if that happened," he says, would you still want it?" And the answer was yes. Like I still wanted to change. So I said, even if I lost all of my students, I still want this.
Mm,
Because for me, it seemed like the best way for me to start to share the curriculum that I was developing. It wasn't, I could serve people who were interested in learning more about the curriculum
hmm.
that I had been developing, and not so much people who just wanted general music instruction, which anyone can provide. So I know there's a lot of people out there that can serve that, but I'm the only person who can really offer this unique curriculum that I've been developing over the last 6 years.
Yeah. So wait, is it like because I know that like with the popMATICS curriculum, it's like we can go into that in a little bit later too, but it's like so different than how I have kind of learned piano growing up, especially with like the traditional way of like just learning a bunch of songs and knowing like learning how to read music first and really focusing on technique. That was something that it seemed like that was something that you wanted to kind of lean towards anyway with your teaching. Is that
Well,
what you're saying?
to let you know, I didn't have music lessons growing up as a child. I didn't have piano lessons. I didn't
Mm.
start playing, so I didn't have an idea of what piano lessons looked like when I first started teaching.
Uh huh.
I started playing in college, and when I started playing piano in college, I was involved in the more in the jazz curriculum, so
Gotcha.
heavily on improvisation. So I never had any specific classical training except for what was required to get my degree.
Hmm.
So, which was just a few semesters of classical piano. So I was
That makes
at
sense. So,
university, but kind of at a beginner level in many ways. And so
hmm.
being introduced for everything to everything for like a child, like for the first time.
Ah,
But still having, I mean, I had a musical background because I was involved in high school band and all that. So I was on track to become, I wanted to be a music teacher, but I thought I was going to be a high school band director.
oh, okay.
When I started to get into piano and I started to learn more about jazz, but at the same time, I was also meeting lots of local musicians. We had a pretty good music scene in our local area, and I got to know a lot of the local musicians, and there wasn't a lot of keyboard players, so I got several opportunities to play with different people. And most of those musicians were self-taught musicians,
Hmm.
and they're wonderful musicians. Many of them learn their instrument through such an organic process that it's difficult for them to explain how they got where they are.
Hmm.
But that didn't stop me from asking and trying. So that was
Nice.
really what I wanted to get at, because I knew that there were people who had spent decades studying music in a traditional format, and they could perhaps perform something at a very high level, but when asked to improvise or play by ear, they felt completely at a loss for how to
Hmm.
approach that, or very uncomfortable. They just had to be absolutely prepared. So they relied on that sheet music, and I had all of these friends who could just play. And
Yeah.
and so I had a mix of traditional education, but I came at it from a little bit different angle where I was an adult and I could remember what it was like not to know these things. I think sometimes it's hard to remember what was it like when I was learning these things at the age of 10, but I can remember
Yeah.
what it was
Exactly.
like. So that's part of it, is just having that really unique perspective around it all. So it wasn't so much intentional that I was trying to avoid something different. It's
Uh-huh.
really just I had a unique relationship with the instrument, and that's what I know how to share with people. And when I
Hmm.
tried to do it the other way, because that's what I did in the beginning was, okay, I'm a piano teacher. I thought I should start by teaching how I thought everybody else was taught. So I went and I looked at the method books. I said, okay, I'll get these books and I'll give them to students. And I realized pretty quickly that they weren't always inspired by that approach. And
Yeah.
it didn't feel authentic to me because I'm teaching something that I never really did. And so as soon as I let go of that and I said, bring in your favorite CD, this is back when
Uh-huh.
people were still carrying around CDs, bring in your favorite CD, we'll listen to it together, and I'll show you how to pick out the sounds that you hear and find them on your instrument. And so that was at the
Nice.
beginning. And then I did that for 10 to 15 years before I even started thinking about writing a curriculum or anything like that. And even that wasn't really intentional. I didn't
Hmm.
say, okay, I'm going to write a curriculum. I just had a good idea. And then I had another good idea. And then eventually you have a series of good ideas. And then you start to put them in order of how they should be introduced to students. And the next thing you know, you've got enough material here. And you realize this is my unique framework for how I see the instrument. And this is something that's helped me, even though I went to school. It's all this stuff after school, and it's all this stuff that I learned from self-taught musicians that's really helping me gain the freedom that I've always wanted. And so now it's interesting because now I'm testing that and I'm sharing that with people and saying, okay, they know it's fine for Tony, but can it work for me too?
Hmm.
And circling back to what I was talking about in the beginning, I knew it was working really well for Angela, and I knew it would work for more students like Angela. I knew there were more students like her. And the interesting shift has been I nearly did lose almost all my students that I
Hmm.
had in the beginning
Yeah.
because
I
they
wanted
were
to
just
ask, like,
looking.
what was that transition like?
Yeah, it was hard because a lot of these students I'd been with for years, and I was used to having very extremely high retention rates. I almost never lost a student until they graduated high school.
Hmm.
But this was after 2 years of being online, after most of those students I had seen in person. Here I am making another big change, and it was bad timing, as I said. It was spring sports season, end of the school year, and I'm making this big change. And I think everybody just said, let's just take the summer off. And some of them tried it, and for some of them it did work, but it's a small percentage for who it worked. And I,
Hmm.
I chose to continue with some with private lessons, and I'm still with those students. So I still have student base, but that was very new to me, this idea that a student would discontinue lessons before they had graduated school. So
Yeah.
now the transition, now I work mostly with adults.
Hmm.
And we do have some excellent students that are in high school. I would say we don't really have anybody that's middle school or younger. It's pretty much all teenagers and up, but mostly adults
Hmm.
in the program now. So it's a completely different audience
Yeah,
that I'm
makes
serving.
sense. I guess for that initial transition that you had, like, what did you feel like you learned about yourself through that process?
Through that initial transition, well, that's a good question. Through that initial process, what did I learn about myself?
Yeah, because it seemed like you were doing this for like years already. Like you already knew a lot about yourself as a teacher, as a person, but like having to go through that now, like what was kind of like that new moving into that new chapter? Like, what you learn about Tony that you didn't know before,
Yeah,
that you didn't
I
know was possible?
that's a really good question. I One of the things I think I thought about a lot when I was doing private one-on-one instruction is I always thought about the financial aspects, and I would almost determine my level of success based on the the net profit at the end of the month.
Mm-hmm.
And every time that I would become so fixated on the financial aspects, and not in a really healthy way, almost more in a concern that if I don't teach these lessons, if I cancel these, if I need to make them up, if I don't, if I credit this, uh, like I'm not going to have enough money. I was always thinking about money, and part of that is just I'm a father. I have 3 children. I have responsibilities to take care of, and so I was in this constant battle of choosing between an opportunity to take time with my children, or I need to teach this lesson. And I always seemed to prioritize the lessons because I needed to ensure that I had the money to take care of my family. And
Mm-hmm.
what I've learned now, which is interesting, because by losing all those students and my income went down considerably, I realized I didn't care about the money so much. And I realized that having the time was much more important to me. And
Mm-hmm.
the true enjoyment of every moment of my teaching schedule, and it changed everything in terms of my level of energy. And I never was one of those teachers who thought I was not happy with what I was doing until I realized I was doing too much of it, and until I realized I could have this lifestyle instead,
Mm-hmm.
and a more manageable schedule that I was in control of. And to have students who that was a big change. There's nothing that tells a student that they have to come to class now. So when they sign, every time they show up to class, it's a choice that they want to be there.
Yeah.
It's not because lessons are at 3:30 on a Thursday. So I think I realized that I had a lot of insecurities and fears about the future, and they were really influencing my decisions now. And because I was so fixed on not letting anything slip, it didn't give me any opportunities to improve anything about my situation. And I probably would have coasted in that lane for a very long time, just doing the same thing that I was comfortable with. So I'm not sure if this is exactly answering your question, but what I really discovered about myself was that this the security for me is no longer in knowing how much money is going to be there at the end of the month. It's more in how many people am I helping this month? How many people are sharing with me their breakthroughs? Because I know that if I continue to focus on who I'm serving and they're getting much better results, then I absolutely know that that is going to just keep expanding. They're going to share it with their friends. And that's how I've always worked. I've always worked through word of mouth. And it's harder now because it's online, and it's not like the neighborhood mom is sharing it with all of her friends and Tony's
Mm-hmm.
coming to the house and got this great piano. But there's students who are sharing these in their other communities that they're in. That's one thing
Yeah.
that's a little different now is a lot of our students, they're not just members of popMATICS. They're also members of other musical programs where they have friends and they teach different things. We're all very compatible. And one of the things that makes us special is that compared to the other programs that they're in is that we're kind of instrument specific, where the other ones are more general musicality,
Mm-hmm.
and developing that. And we do all of that too, but we focus it on the piano. So that's what they
Yeah.
come to us for.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I think that
Yeah.
really like resonates with me too because um, part of my story as well is like when and I've shared it before on my channels, like when I was transitioning, I think the last point of when I was transitioning out of my piano studio was when I think I had like 4 students left and they were all back to back to back. And there were students that I had to travel to. So out of my week, it was like 3 hour, it was like a 3 hour block out of the entire week. And that was the only time I was teaching piano at that time. And I remember just being so stressed throughout the week. like for that time coming up because I didn't want to have to drive in traffic. I just wasn't energized by piano lessons anymore, and I really felt like it wasn't about the money, and it really wasn't about the time that was burning me out because what, like 3 hours out of your week, that's like nothing. But it was
Right.
like the energy that I was having through that that was so important. And like I like how you focused in on like instead of how much money am I making, how many people can I be able to help too? Um, and energy is so important because we can't serve those people to our highest capacity if we don't have the right energy. So yeah, I
Absolutely.
completely agree.
I think it's entirely possible for us to include all of the things that we want. Sometimes we get limited by what we think is possible.
Hmm.
And I had a lot of that from people in the beginning when I was trying to explain the idea when it was still very new and I didn't have the whole picture complete in my mind the way I do now. And when I was sharing this, well, that's not going to work. and and well, that's not really the point. The point is to say, I want these two things, and even though it sounds like they're in competition with each other and they can't work, I think they can. So, my goal wasn't, it's okay if you make less money as long as you're happier. My goal
Hmm.
is, can I have a schedule that I'm completely satisfied with and make more money and create all of that and provide it to people for less than what they're paying now? And so that was really
Yeah.
a part of it. Is I wanted, because this was a time where I had, I'm like, okay, I guess I could do the typical, let's raise my rates and tighten up my policy, but then I'm still dealing with 50 private lessons a week on my calendar, and I'm not going to be happy. That's not going to fix anything. So I can solve all my problems, but I still won't have what I want.
Yeah.
But can I have, so you figure out a way to include everything in your vision, and then you start to work on that. And it's less about problem solving, it's more about creating opportunities for people.
Hmm.
So I can look at all the things that I'd like to get done throughout the course of a day, and I can build my schedule around that. So I've built a program that's not only great for the students, but it's great for me too, because we get to focus in on the areas of music learning that I really want to focus on, which is learning by listening, creating, and then talking about all those connections that we make. I call that the understanding portion. I can channel all of my efforts into something that's good for me. And I know at this point in my learning, after playing for 20 years now, if it's good for me, it's good for them too.
Hmm.
And if my whole purpose is I'm going to try to make music easy for you, I'm going to try to explain it in a way that makes it very accessible, not quick, not fast. This isn't like piano in 28 days, but making the process easy so people can get to that point where they can create without so many barriers holding them back. So
Hmm.
um, I I love that, and I was thinking about what we discussed briefly when we spoke before the
Uh-huh.
podcast, and you were telling me about what you do now and how you're really looking to help people build like non-traditional models, like people who are to move them from what they're doing into something that's different. And I love that because I find so many of people who are trying to help music teachers in this space, they just kind of tell them, this is what you need to do. You just need to go to group lessons, or you just need to go do this one thing. And while you can provide all those options, I like that you're tuning into what is it that's really going to make you happy and fulfilled in your music studio, and how can we build that for you?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the beauty of like the hybrid model that I teach is that every teacher's model is different, and it's
Yes.
always going to be different because every teacher has a different like style of pedagogy, and every teacher has their own dreams and goals of what they want as like in their life as well. And what I like about your model is that it creates the internal motivation for students. Like they when they come to the classes, they make a choice, they want to be there, but it also kind of fosters that independence as well, where they're not relying on you for a one-on-one lesson or anything like that, but they're able to use you as more of like their guide, their compass in their own learning. as well. So I'd love to hear more about like, can you share more about like just the structure of popmatics, how it works in terms of if I was a student, what I would be going through and what I'd be learning and how?
Sure. Well, I'll say it's a bit of a hybrid model where we have live classes mixed with recorded videos for people to watch. So we've made it in a way where it can appeal to a lot of a wide variety of audiences. So if you're the type of student who is really excited about the thought of coming to something live, you have the opportunity to come to these live classes twice a day. We do class for 2 hours a day. We have a listening class and a creating class. However, if you're the type of student who says, I don't really want to go to the live classes, well, that's fine too, because we create a recorded video of the experience each week. So we take one of our featured listening classes, we record that, the creating concepts and the storyline that we use for our improvisations. I always record a video there as well. So those videos are available and people can watch those at their own pace. So we have lots of people in the program who never show up to a live class, yet they're watching the videos and they're engaging that way. And I'll talk more about that a little bit, how we know that they're engaging and the support that we offer, even if they don't show up. But
Mm-hmm.
that's a big part of it, is just making it really accessible. We also have a community on Discord that is also optional. Some people really love having that community element and having other people to talk with and to share some of their improvisations. We really encourage that in our creating classes. We always take 5 minutes at the end of every class and we say, okay, now we're going to create with some of the ideas that we had today. We encourage students to record during that time, and we give each student on Discord a private channel. We call that their locker, and that's where they can send their audio recordings. And if they've taken notes during class or they want to save the class notes that I have, they can always put stuff in their locker. But they can also share in the public channel as well. So we have students that do that and say, hey, that was a great class. This is what I came up with. And everybody gets to hear a little bit from others. So we have that community element as well. And then, but some people don't really want to deal with a form of social media. And so we put out a weekly guide at the end of the week so they can get everything in
Mm.
a like a newsletter. And Angela does a wonderful job of talking about what we were learning this week, and then she gives links to all the videos. So it's really it works out really nice as far as the flexibility. As far
Uh-huh.
as what the curriculum offers, as far as the program, we divide it into three areas. I mentioned earlier the listening, creating, and understanding. So the learning by listening is what helps you to be able to play by ear with confidence. So it's not so much just the goal of the listening classes is to figure out how much you can work out before your hands touch the instrument, before you go to the keyboard. So for myself, I know right now that I feel 100% confident in my ability to figure out almost anything if I can use my instrument along with the recording. And every 3 months I can look back and I can see how my listening's improved to the point where more often than not, I'm absolutely confident that I know how to play that, even though I haven't actually tried it on my instrument. So that's what the listening class does, is it tries to eliminate the guesswork and really get you to identify what it is that you're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
The creating classes are more, it's like it's an improvisation. We put limitations on things. I call them creative constraints, because you could start with unlimited possibilities when you're improvising, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
we focus in on certain things. Today we're going to be working on this landscape or in this key. We're going to be working within this rhythmic structure. We're going to have a certain idea and we all work with it together. And I build it up. I start small and I keep adding to it. And similar to the way that maybe a fitness instructor might modify the instructions for a class to accommodate people at different levels of ability. Here's
Mm-hmm.
the challenge, here's a way to modify it. Or here's the simple presentation. If you need it more advanced, try it this way. And so
Yeah.
that's what's happening. And so we're all creating together in the same environment. We're all working from the same instructions, but everybody's creating their own music from it.
Nice.
So that's
Nice.
kind of the creating elements. And then the understanding, that's the only one that we don't do live. Though that I have a pre-recorded curriculum, our 40 lessons to develop your understanding of sound, and that's there in our. We use the platform Thinkific, which is designed for
Mm-hmm.
the linear curriculums. And students can go through there. They can mark off what they've completed, And so all of everything that they learn there gets reinforced in the listening and creating classes. So all three of those areas are always working together. I'm using the same vocabulary, reinforcing everything, but we just like to shine the spotlight on one specific area at a time.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's the main three areas. That there's really just two other things that we do. One, we have a class that's called office hours. So if people have questions, they can submit questions and we answer them in office hours every Friday. They're also welcome to come live to that. That's the only class that we record, the live class that
Hmm.
we record, because we want people to have access to the, the answers to their questions if they can't make it.
Yeah.
And then we do also whatever our featured listening class was of the week. Like for example, this week we were doing Hallelujah, and we actually listened to a few different versions of it. At the end of the week, I'm going to create a tutorial series on Hallelujah where I have it in 4 different stages. In stage 1, I focus on melody. Stage 2, I focus on bass lines. Stage 3, we focus on harmony, basic chords. And stage 4
Hmm.
is where we bring all the elements together, add the decorations, and I give them ideas. But it's not the type of tutorials that people are used to on YouTube, which is like, press this key. It's not fully prescriptive. It's got a
Hmm.
sketch, it's got an outline, it's got clear goals of what to do, but it's designed to build your independence and help you understand how to take what you hear and actually play it on the instrument.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So when you're going from like one on one, um, teaching like teaching more kids, the younger crowd, to then go into this more hybrid model where students are coming to you a little bit more older. I think one of the concerns that I've heard from a lot of teachers is that, um, especially with letting go of control and not having that one on one anymore, like will students be behind, or what if they need that, what if they need that extra support, or like what if they don't thrive in this model? Like how, do you feel like a model like this is better suited for a student that is already independent, or do you feel like the letting go of control is what creates that independence, that growth for the student? Like especially with teachers who teaching the younger crowd, already, like how do you help with those concerns when they do want to make that transition but they feel like their students might not be able to thrive in a new model?
So I never really felt like I was had control in the first place. And I think that I know in the typical student teacher relationship, it almost sets up this authoritative role that like the teacher is going to set the expectations, the student is going to perform them, and then feedback will be given and songs will be performed until it's at a level of satisfaction. I've never really operated like that.
Hmm.
Um, I've always given more to the student than I take myself. So if I can give like 51%, I love this quote by Gary Vee. If I can give 51% of the value of this relationship to the other person, like I'll know what to do with my 49%. And so if I was working with a student and they said, I don't really want to learn this song anymore, then we're not going to learn this song anymore. And I'm okay with that.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah.
one of the first lessons I learned from my mentor of 20 years, when I first met him, he said, everything stems from interest. And I was like, how true that is. Because for me, I was going to school and I could pass my projects and exams and all that, but I was doing kind of the bare minimum over there. And I was focusing all of my efforts on the music I was making with my friends because that's where my interest was. So I've
Hmm.
always tried to practice interest-led learning with my students. And as long as you put that first, it's not it requires possibly more effort on the part of the teacher, or at least I don't even know if it's more effort. It's that it requires a level of comfort that a student could come to me one day
Hmm.
and tell me what we're going to do and me feel comfortable just jumping into that with him. And I know that that's not something that everybody's going to feel comfortable with, but
Hmm.
I always love that. And I think my students always enjoyed that idea that it's piano day. I could tell Tony a song I wanted to learn that I heard on the car on the way to piano lessons, and I know that he's going to help me with it. And
Yeah.
so I've never really felt like I had control in the first place. So the idea of letting go of it, I never really wanted to take control over someone else. I've always just wanted to see what adjustments I could make. And that's kind of partly how this model happened. Was I had so many students that were messaging me, and I was like, I don't want to just tighten up these policies and take more control over this. I just want to tell people the terms and conditions for which I'm willing to work and give them
Hmm.
unlimited access to it.
Yeah.
So I always like to see what adjustments I can make in a situation that don't involve changing anything about what the student is doing, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Yeah. I'm glad you like always have allowed it to be student led. Um, like that's something that I wish I started off with when I was teaching piano, but like, when you first start teaching, you really just base it off of your own experience. And
Sure.
that was never my experience. I never had that experience where it was kind of like I got to lead the lesson until I really got to college. And when I finally got to have control over what I did in my private lessons, um, it became really fun because
Yeah.
every single semester we had to do juries and things like that too. And because I was a music ed major and I wasn't like a performance major.
Yeah.
My private teacher for percussion, he wasn't like really strict on, hey, you have to do this type of repertoire because it's gonna set you up for auditions and things like that too. Like, never had that expectation. So he was mostly like, yeah, you play like, what do you want to play for this semester? And I always brought out like the weirdest pieces. Like I would play marimba. I had a marimba solo
Yeah.
with like a electronic backing track, and I did like a tambourine solo with a backing track as well.
Yeah.
So they were just like these really weird, like contemporary pieces that I really enjoyed, which made the learning a lot more fun. So I would have wished I had something like that growing up for sure.
Yeah. I'd like to add to. I'm thinking back to your previous question. The idea of letting go of control, or letting go. This thought of letting students lead the learning process. It's important to know that you can let students decide what they get to play without necessarily determining what they get to learn, because
Mm,
we're still the teacher. We get to choose how we share that information, and we're still kind of in control of the experience and how to unpack that whole experience. So that's why for me it's always, the song doesn't really matter. It's not about the song. You're never learning the song. You're learning the process of learning a song through whatever means that you happen to be experienced at. And for me, it was never through sheet music. It was always through listening and through a recording and trying to figure out as much as I can. So over the years, and especially in these last 2 years, I've really discovered more about what that means and how to lead somebody through that process from the beginning, even if they have no experience at all. So, you know, it doesn't get them off the hook from anything, because the
hmm.
first thing I'm going to say, oh, I want to learn the song. Cool. Do you know what key it's in? And then they're like, no. And it's like, well, that's the first thing, man. You got to know what key it's in. And they're like, I'm still not sure. It's like, your friend asks you, come over, come over his house and hang out. The first question is, well, where do you live? You got to know where he lives in order to go visit him. Same thing here.
Yeah,
You got to know, like, where are we here? There's foundational knowledge that needs to be built. And
100%.
that's primarily what I like to focus on, is that foundational knowledge. I'm not so I'm not so concerned with taking them. I don't. I never want to. I never want my students to, like, be more of what it, like. I always want to make sure that most of what's happening in their music is coming from them, not from somewhere else.
Hmm.
So if you can have a foundation that they can build upon, and then develop beyond that. I don't want them. I'm not like the authority on music. I don't want to say this is how it is. I just want to show them that basic foundation so that they have the freedom to go pursue it for a lifetime. But at some point, you want to make sure that there is a clear end here. And yeah, you can stay in the program as long as you want, but there's a clear end here where once you've done this, you have what you need and you can go on and do this on your own. And that, I don't know, is always what's happening. I meet so many adults who say, I used to play the piano. And it's like, yeah, they used to play the piano because they've forgotten everything that they learned when they were taking lessons as a child, to the point where they can't even play a simple song on their own. And I don't think that that same thing is true of other instruments. I know a lot of people who take guitar lessons for 6 months and learn some basic chords and can strum a few basic songs for the next, the rest of their life.
Hmm.
So I wanted to make sure that that was kind of part of the lesson experience too, is that I don't care how long they're here, whatever they learn, I want it to stick. And I want to make sure that even if they're only here for 6 months, that they can take what they learned here and they can play a little piano for the rest of their life, rather than saying, I used to play piano.
Nice, nice. And I like what you said about that everything they learn really comes from them and not from what other, like, any external forces too. Because I share that a lot with when I'm helping teachers create their hybrid models. Is that like um, I feel like a lot of the way that I grew up and or I grew into my studio is like hearing what other people have done, and of course it's important to like hear what's worked for other people, but just copying them just because they grew this way has never really worked for me, and it's always kind of I've always had to guide myself with what do I personally want, and that applies for like the choices in my life as well, and that's kind of like what led up for me to be where I am today. Is always following what do I want rather
Yeah.
than what are other people telling me
Yeah,
to
because
do.
copying might get you through a situation, or might
Mm,
get you, um, to pass the test or something, but you don't really learn anything from it, and it doesn't feel good.
yeah.
It doesn't feel good to copy somebody else's model. And I see this oftentimes in the in the education industry, where most of the conversations that are had in groups are more centered around business practices and policies and things like that. And they'll ask, well, how do you deal with this situation? Everybody will give their advice, and then they'll say, well, that one sounds good, I'll copy it. And then they don't fully even know why they're adopting this policy, but they're trying to avoid a problem. And that's one way to do it, but again, you're trying to avoid a negative outcome, which is very different than generating a positive outcome. I've seen you talk about this, like it's uh you could have in a I saw something you put the other day. The only thing that's like worse than having like not enough students is
Oh
having
yeah.
too many of the
The
wrong
wrong.
students,
Yeah.
and feeling like none of these lessons are fulfilling me. All of these relationships are difficult. I'm having all these conversations with parents about payments and I didn't want to have any of that.
Yeah. I didn't
I was
sign up for any of this
yeah,
as
and
a
so
teacher.
that was part of the inspiration behind a model like this too. Is like, I don't ever want to have a conversation ever again with a parent about scheduling ever.
Hmm.
The only thing I want to talk to them about is like how awesome their kid's doing, or and again, I had to learn a lot about this kind of model. One of the things I didn't realize at the time, I knew part of my success was my personality and the way that I connected with each student, and the fact that I made it easy for them. But I didn't realize that a big part of why I had such a successful retention was because like Billy had lessons at 3:30 on Wednesdays, and because they
Hmm.
had an appointment on their calendar, that once you remove that and you say, well, here's all the appointments, you can come whenever you want, that a student would actually not choose any of the options, or that it would be difficult for them to do it on their own, and then the parents would have to. It was too much to not have be told what to do.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that any student in music is going to have long-term success if they're just doing what they're told to do. At some
Just
point,
because
when
there's no
somebody
appointment
says
there.
you're not, yeah, when they stop telling you what to do, you're not going to do it on your own. So you have to bring in that level of independence at some point.
Yeah.
And so why not just do it from the beginning?
I love that. One last question, because I
Sure.
know I want to make sure that we can get through. This might be a long one, but
Okay.
like hopefully we'll condense it to like the last 10 minutes
Sure.
here before we head off. But creativity
Yeah.
and creativity in business, in the way that you teach, in the way that you come up with what is the next thing I'm going to teach in my listening classes or my creativity classes, and especially like from like creative act two, like just I'd love to hear your process for that, whether it applies to the way you built your business. And I feel like you've been very creative with the way popMATICS is created as well. But like what comes when you think of creativity in your piano business, like what's the first thing that comes to mind for you, and what's that process look like?
Well, I want to be very transparent about the creative process with all of my students. And part of that means being um, open to practicing creativity in front of my students, and sometimes not always having a plan right away, or trusting that we'll be able to come up with something together. And that's
Mm,
part of it. If you throw yourself in enough of these situations where you have to improvise on the spot, you learn how to navigate those situations. And so as far as what we choose, like for example, our creating classes, I spent a long time crafting the first 10 lessons, and I put it into an experience, like a 10-day experience for that. I tell everyone who joins the program, this is a good little course to go through. And once you go through these 10 days, you will be comfortable jumping into any of our creating classes. And so since I've given that beginning and that foundation there, when they come to class, I don't really know in advance what I'm going to teach that week. A lot of
mhm,
times it'll happen based on what I heard in the previous listening class. Maybe we listened to something and we heard something in a recording and we said, that's really interesting. Let's now take that sound that we heard and let's work with it on the instrument. And so a lot of that develops organically and in the moment. And that's part of the creating classes that happen Monday through Thursday. The idea that is born on Monday gets developed throughout the next 4 days. And then on Friday morning, when I record the creating class, I've already had 4 live classes where we've workshopped this
mm,
idea. And in the live classes, students are there. What do you think of this? Are you having success with it? I get to ask them right there. Well, this was challenging. And a lot of times I'm getting thumbs up now, which is great. So, because it means after 18 months, I'm learning how much I can deliver at any particular time. So that's
mhm.
what I'm always looking for from students. Is everybody doing okay? And so I like to check in with people. And if there's any questions, we have the opportunity to take care of it right there. So I don't ever want it to feel like there's an agenda or we need to get back to something or we need to get back on schedule. I want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to ask a question, and we can all learn together in that environment. And I make sure that everybody leaves class with at least one new thing, that one new thing that's going to for them to think about, because again, it's not just about collecting all these little ideas and concepts. It's about changing
Mhm.
the way that they think and approach music. And so through seeing my creative process and the decisions that I'm making, the choices I'm making, they'll know how to make their own choices when they're sitting at their instrument. So that's kind of part of it for the creating element. We can
Nice,
talk about the
nice.
listening too, but I'll give you if anything you want
Yeah,
to say.
last thing I wanted to add in was just like it's just like I feel that as well with like creating hybrid models and things like that too. Like we're constantly stretching our boundaries and stretching what is capable for us because we're trying new things. And I always tell my teachers to be creative. This is like the creative part of business. It's like creatively solving problems. And I feel like musicians are the best at that because they're
Yeah.
just naturally born creatives. But we often forget that like it should be fun as well.
Oh,
And creating a model that should be fun for you, that should be
yeah.
fun for the students is really at the end of the day how we're going to make this like sustainable
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. It feels good. I feel like a student in my own program, which is
Mm,
really fun too.
yeah.
Because when I go in these listening classes, I don't know in advance. We pick those every Friday after office hours. We have a little social hour where some people hang out and we talk about the songs for the next coming week, and people will throw suggestions in and say that sounds good, and we'll put them on the list. I don't know these songs yet, but I'll learn them alongside with them, and that's the idea. It's not everything has to be planned in advance. You can enjoy the learning process together, and as you said, having fun is a big part of it. You want to enjoy every moment of what you're doing, and
I love
the
it.
students will pick up on that.
Awesome. Oh, I love this. I love this. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
just sharing your story and allowing me to learn this hour as well. Like this is something I honestly wish I had when I was a kid and even like going into college too, just like the I was telling you before, but like the oral skills and the creativity, like it's crazy to think that like that was the last things that I learned in my journey of musicianship up until now. That like I wish I had that like way earlier in my life. So thank you for doing
Right.
what you're doing.
Oh well, thanks for having me. It's great that we finally found some time to come together and do this.
Yeah. What's the best place to reach you, contact you, or I know like popMATICS website?
Yeah,
Like if you could share some of
popmatics.com
that.
is great. You can go there. We almost always have a link right up top where we have a free workshop if you want to come and experience a live presentation where you can come and ask questions and learn more about what it is we like to share here at popmatics. That's a great place. And then if you go to any of your social media outlets and type in at popmatics, it's a pretty unique name. We're usually the only ones that come up.
Awesome, awesome. I'll definitely put that in the description. Cool.
Great.
Appreciate you.
All
And
right.
hope you have a great rest of your day, Tony.
Thanks, man. Have a great day.